Alrighty, mates. Quick peek at the BoxRec stats. Mr. Mark Magsayo versus Mr. Gary Russell Jr. Featherweight Championship fight. Alright, starting right off, it was a pretty uneventful weigh-in. Besides the fact that Mr. Russell Jr. came in 0.5 pounds heavier, but I don't believe he had any issues dropping that 0.5 pounds. Also, something worth mentioning is the simple fact that Mr. Russell Jr. alluded to an injury before the fight. Fortunate for Gary Russell Jr., he does have experience fighting with injuries. I believe not too long ago, 2013, he fought with a hairline fracture in his right hand and still won the fight. In the earlier rounds, it appeared that Mr. Russell Jr. struggled a little bit to get into his mode against Mr. Magsayo. His speed was good, defense seemed appropriate at the time, but it did look like he was having a little trouble finding his mode in the early rounds. Quite possibly, Russell Jr.'s inactivity over the last 2 years might have been in effect slightly here, with him finding his mode and getting synchronized against a younger and at this point worthy opponent, Mr. Magsayo. But with that being said, there are times, no matter how the fight's going, that something pops up, changes the flow, the intensity level, and that thing that popped up was Mr. Russell Jr.'s right shoulder injury that he had alluded to prior to the fight. And you know, normally when there's an injury, let's say a fighter has a cut, it's quite obviously the whole normal path the fight was taking changes. In this scenario here, with the knowledge that Mr. Russell Jr. is having a problem with his right arm, there was no adjustments made by the Roach's corner and from Mr. Magsayo himself. In the post-fight interview, he revealed he was aware of Russell Jr.'s injury, but in the fight I did not see him or his corner attempt to capitalize on this injury in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, end result, Gary Russell Jr. loses his belt. Mark Magsayo becomes the new featherweight champion of the world. I'm not going to give him much credit for this win. I thought he should have been able to jump on Mr. Gary Russell a bit more aggressive, knowing that his opponent was one-handed. Also, Mr. Freddie Roach should have gave some tactical advice on that one-arm bandit.